I would like to begin this video with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron, Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Nothing I say is necessarily directly affiliated with the University of Toronto. I'm just using the land acknowledgement from my school. Thank you.
So the next type of question is going to be policy questions. This is going to be kind of like a subtype of the situation questions. So it's still going to follow a really similar structure, but I like to use something called PICO, which you'll also find in research, which talks about the patient or the population that you're going to be addressing, the intervention that you're going to be putting in place, the comparison, and then the outcome that you're looking for. And here's how you can apply that to these policy questions. So you're going to start by acknowledging that this is going to be a really complex situation and difficult situation to address. Next, you're going to define what the problem is with this situation and what makes it so complex. And you can bring it into a bigger world issue or a bigger topic within the community at that time. And then you're going to move on to the population. So who is affected by this issue, and talk about ways that they are affected by the issue. Next, you're going to talk about the intervention, or you can think about this as the potential different solutions that you have to this policy issue. And so if you take one solution or one side of the policy issue, you're then going to delve into the benefits and the drawbacks of taking that side. And then you want to, of course, look at the other side or the other potential solutions that you can use to address this policy issue. And then again, you're going to be talking about the benefits and drawbacks of that decision. Finally, you're going to choose what plan that you're going to use going forward. And similar to the situation questions, you're going to talk about why that plan was selected, and still talk about some of the drawbacks that you're going to have to consider moving forward. Finally, you're going to do a tie back to medicine and what lessons you can apply to medicine in general. So that is how you're going to answer your policy type questions.
Pause the video here, take a moment, read through the question, and try to answer it for yourself. Once you've answered it for yourself, return back to the video and see how I answer the question. Remember, I may not have answered it the same as you, but it doesn't mean your approach is wrong. It's just for the sake of comparison. Also, my apologies in advance because of the flickering light. That was just a light issue I couldn't get fixed in my apartment, but try to ignore it and focus on how I answer the question.
So thank you so much for this question. Tent cities or encampment sites are a manifestation of a larger, deeper structural issue that I do not believe is going to be resolved by simply getting rid of the encampment sites themselves. So here in Toronto, about 15,000 individuals face homelessness each year, many of which go unsheltered completely. As a resident of Toronto and somebody who has lived here for quite a few years, I know firsthand that there's a lot of people who are unhoused. It doesn't take very long for you to meet an unhoused person as you're walking down the street. And so that should be very alarming, given that we live in such a metropolitan area. So when I'm thinking about this issue of encampment sites, I'm thinking about human dignity. I'm thinking about resource allocation. And I'm thinking about the safety of the public and the people who are within those encampment sites, as well as their health. So on the one hand, some people may argue that it's best to get rid of these encampment sites or take legal action against those who are within these encampment sites, which I can completely understand. Just because if I think about the larger population outside of this encampment sites, well, Typically, these encampment sites are set up in places that are already disadvantaged. And so, what does that mean for the children in that area, right? I'm thinking about the parents. They're worried about these children. If they're already disadvantaged, this is just taking away one more thing from them, a safe place to play. So, this is of large concern, of course. And then another thing to consider in terms of safety is the safety of those within the encampment sites themselves. They're not necessarily the most safe place for people to stay. And I'll get back to that in just a moment. But if I consider the other hand of people who want to keep encampment sites, they want to keep them as a measure of harm reduction. Just because in these encampment sites, large amounts of people are gathered together who wouldn't otherwise be. Usually, unhoused people would be scattered around the city, and there would be no way to reach them in an organized way. So through these encampment sites, there is a way for healthcare providers and social services to interact directly with the unhoused population, provide some education, provide some harm reduction measures such as safe needle injection. So these are all the things that can be thought about when wanting to maintain these encampment sites. However, ultimately, these are not a long-term solution, of course. These encampment sites are not safe to the people within or outside of the encampment sites themselves. There's definitely been fires that have happened within these encampment sites. There's there's physical altercations that can cause bodily harm to the people within these sites. Um, there's going to be spread of communicable diseases. So these are all things to be considered when you're thinking about encampment sites. However, if there is no concrete alternative for these encampment sites, then I do not support simply getting rid of them or taking legal action against those who are within the encampment sites. If this is an issue that is a structural issue, getting rid of the encampment sites is only going to cause another issue to come up, or taking legal action against people within these encampment sites is only going to allow somebody else to come into these encampment sites. So the issue is not fixed by simply getting rid of the physical site. So how do we address this? We're going to have to collaborate with all the stakeholders. That means listening to people with lived experiences from encampment sites. It means listening to community members and collaborating with the municipal government to understand how resources can be allocated to address this issue. And it also means collaborating with law enforcement to come to an understanding of how this should be addressed through law enforcement measures. And as somebody who is going to be going into medicine, this is something I have to be concerned about, just because there are downstream effects of poverty and things like living in an encampment site. Of course, people are going to be living in close proximity to each other. And so that's just going to give rise to more communicable diseases. But then there's also the potential, like through poverty, to have an increase in non-communicable diseases as well. So all of this is going to be concerning to somebody who's interested in working in medicine. And I definitely am invested in finding a solution to this issue that can have direct issues on the health of individuals. So thank you so much for this question, and thank you so much for your time.
So that is exactly how I would answer a policy question. Again, I did not have any papers or anything in front of me while answering this question, so I tried to simulate exactly how you would answer this in the real thing. And so I'm sure it wasn't perfect, and if you answered it differently or if you would have added anything, I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. I'm curious if anybody answered it the same way as me or if somebody answered it a little bit differently. But just to get back to the figures, so in the very beginning of my answer, I did state a figure, which is completely not required. However, I do think it can make you stand out if you have some background knowledge on whatever topic is presented, but you do not have to be an expert in anything that they ask you about during the interview. And it is completely acceptable to stop and say, I'm not familiar with this topic, but dot dot dot, and go on to answer the question. So if you're not familiar with the topic, you can state that during your interview. Also, always feel comfortable to say, I need more time. Can I think about that? And stop and think about how you would like to answer the question. Yes, it's going to take away time from your own answer, but it is completely appropriate if you need to gather your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, share with your friends if you know they're also preparing, and I hope you return back for the next videos. Bye!